Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of One Vision, the Fintech Views. This is Theo, your host for today's episode. Joining us on the show today is an old friend who has also been on the show before, Sandeep Mangaraj, co-founder of Aileron Group. Also, before this, has been in tech and consulting for quite a long time. So, a veteran of the industry, if you will. Welcome back, Sandeep.
Thank you, Theo. A veteran. I guess we are at
Veteran!
that time in our career that we are veterans.
Well, an expert. How's that? But we've been around for a while, and that I wear it. I wear the badge proudly. So, let's catch it up to speed. What have you been up to?
So you mentioned I started Aileron in 2025. So I'll tell you, it has been fun. It has been scary. It has been busy. It has definitely been humbling. So building a company in a very, very crowded marketplace, I think I'm walking away with a lot of lessons. So first and foremost, honestly, the thing I keep relearning is that there is no substitute for real conversations. One on one, in person, when possible, in a world that is trying to scale everything, it's actually interesting that the oldest approach still works best. Right. The second is discipline. Right? Again, we talked about noise in this space. Everyone has an AI opinion. Everyone. And I mean, I hear it also from my children all the time. So AI opinions are galore. So what's the only thing that cuts through? And that is results. So we have stayed heads down on client success. That's the test. The only marketing that actually compounds is client success stories. And then third, our core thesis is getting market confirmation. So that makes me happy and hopeful as we are looking ahead. So when we started Aileron, we had a bet. The barrier to AI success isn't technology, it's people and process. What we kept seeing was analysis paralysis, firms spending months on strategy before touching the technology. So we developed what we call a run, walk, crawl approach. Experiment with what's available, learn before you have earned the right to build. That's resonating, and I think that's what I would love to, explore more as we talk about today.
That's why I said veteran. Literally, it's right there, right off the bat. In 1 minute, you proved me right. Um, I like that perspective of looking at it. So let's dive right into it. You're talking about even your kids have opinion about AI, and so do my kids. And gosh, very strong opinions, I might add, especially for teenagers. Now, looking at our industry at large, we don't lack opinions, nor do we lack reports out there that talk about how different organizations across sectors are spending a lot of money. They are experimenting, throwing things on the wall, and then at the same time, they're also coming back and say, we can't quite prove the ROI. We cannot justify the massive investment we've put into all these projects. Can you share your point of view with us? What do you think about that? Is there truth to it, or is there something else that we're missing, or perhaps we're not measuring the right thing? What's going on?
Let's start with what we are measuring and what we are not measuring. So, there's a statistic that's been floating around quite a bit. Right? 95% of enterprise AI pilots fail to deliver value. And it has come from this MIT Media Labs report. But as we know, that report's methodology has been questioned and it has since been taken down from the Media Lab website. Having said that, the narrative has definitely stuck. We come across it all the time in conversations that we're having. And to me, that's a little dangerous because it gives people permission to wait, to defer, to say, let's see if this really works, if it can really make any changes before I commit my time and resources to it. So, what do? We said, okay, why don't we do our own research? And so, what we decided to do is let's go and look at customer success stories, right? Because at the beginning of a hype, when there's a lot of marketing going on, there are a lot of success stories. So, these are the best examples, right, of what's succeeding today. And what did we find? Only 21% of them had any financial impact and very few, if any, had any ROI. So The data is not saying that AI doesn't work. It's saying most companies aren't sure what to measure and or are not measuring. So my question is, if you're not measuring, how can you claim failure? I think the only thing you can claim is ignorance.
Ouch. Straight to the point, my friend. Straight to the point. Always. Um, so, all right, well, let's. Is it failure or is it because of perhaps coming from a different perspective? And I'm asking this because I'm genuinely curious, right? If we look back at the last 2 years, there's so much of a push, right, towards the executives of organizations, boardrooms, etc. Hey, the company down the street is doing XYZ. We need to do that too. The whole concept of fear of missing out. Now, whether or not that was the right intention to push the company forward, it is what it is. So, could that have attributed to executives rushing into projects without thinking through, is this the right place to use the technology? Is this the right technology to use? And how are we going to basically structure it so that we can prove whether or not something is working?
There is definitely some of it, to be sure, right? When your board is asking you, what are you doing about Gen AI? When you hear a report that says, there are people who are getting a lot of value out of it, then the natural question is, oh, am I doing something wrong? Let me go, let me try it. And so I think there is pressure there. But success and failure ultimately will have to do with and be tied to outcomes that you're driving. And so, if we have clarity in terms of what outcomes we are trying to drive, and then we look at not just AI and Gen AI. Gen AI is the flavor of the month. And I personally believe, and I know Theo, we have talked about it, you do think that this is a transformative technology. But having said that, it doesn't mean that this general purpose tool is applicable everywhere, right? So we have to start with what is the outcome, what is it that we are trying to do, and what fits where. I think that is really, really important. So, what we have seen is that when we talk to customers and we walk them through what their AI journey is today and where it should go, we have used frameworks that helps them think through more expansively, right, rather than more narrowly. So I think looking at where all you may be and you should be thinking about AI, without focusing on what everyone else is doing and everyone else's playbook. I think that's a way in which we have seen our customers start thinking about and prioritizing areas where they can start seeing value today from the infrastructure that they have today, from the people they have today, the data and the processes they have today, because I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I think that can set organizations apart as well, as far as how far they can head in and, with respect to the rest of the pack. Because I remember that's one thing that you and I had talked about even before I started writing my third book. We had coffee in Bryant Park. And I still remember it was that morning. That was before you walked to your office in Times Square. And we were chatting and we are talking about Gen AI. And I was like, I was coming to you because I'm like, Sandeep, I see all these companies, deploying technology, and the ones that have a lot of resources, a lot of talents, they seem to be pulling ahead. Is that going to be the case? And I remember vividly, you told me and you sat across from me, you looked at me, you're like, no, I think it's reversed because the cost is going to collapse. And with the cost going down and capabilities going up, it is going to be an opportunity for the mid-market banks. And you were so passionate about it. I remember walking away from it. And then I started writing my third book. Tell me a little bit. It's been a year since we had that conversation. Do you still think that is true? That because the state where the technology is, because of what we can do with it, it is still an opportunity for the mid-market banks to deploy the tech and catch up with the big guys?
First of all, you're very generous, Theo. I am
I
sure
remember our conversation.
You talk to a lot of smart people all over the world, so I'm happy I did, share something that led to your book, which, by the way, I absolutely love. So, yeah, let me go back to your question, right? I absolutely believe that is still the case. And there's data out there that shows that token costs have come down dramatically, right? I don't know whether you can say decreased exponentially, but they have definitely come down dramatically. But at the same time, the picture has gotten a little bit more complex, right? Because we have moved beyond traditional approaches that we started off like RAG to like reasoning models and agentic workflows. So they use more tokens. Having said that, the per task cost equation is definitely going one way, and that's coming down, right? So that is, we can debate like exactly how much, but it's definitely coming down. Now, but I'll tell you what hasn't changed since the conversation that we have. You do not need millions to get a ticket to this party, right? A regional bank, a community bank, a credit union can access the same state of the art models as the largest banks. And the cost is almost the same. There could be some discounts in the margin. So the experimental cost is trivial compared to what we have seen even 2 years ago, and honestly trivial compared to what we have seen in past cycles. So let's talk about mid market banks, right? I would argue they actually have an advantage beyond cost. They also tend to have fewer approval layers. There's a shorter distance between decision and action, and they could have less technical debt. So while the big players may have resources, resources don't buy you speed. And right now, speed of learning is what matters the most.
Speed of learning. I need to remind my kids that actually it's applicable not just to our industry, but for everybody. Speed of learning, because everything is changing so fast right now. We need to catch up, and we need to be there where our customers are, and we need to be there where the world is. To put it in a distilled way, but let's think through that because I did remember you had mentioned um, the complexity or lack thereof or less of it in smaller organizations that can give the smaller guys more of an advantage because you have less of a legacy, less of a silo. A little bit things can be moving a little bit faster. What about outcome? Because earlier you talked about outcome. We need to look at um, outcome and value and what we're driving it. So when it comes to deploying AI, who owns the outcome that AI is supposed to improve? And more importantly, and we've been seeing this more and more often now, who should we hold accountable when things go wrong? Because those are two important bookend questions, isn't it?
It is. And actually, the outcomes and who owns it should not change whether we are talking about AI or not. If you look at an org chart, you do know the the leadership team has made a decision of who is accountable across functions, who is accountable across businesses. I don't necessarily see why that needs to change, right? Because they are ultimately the executives who are driving value for you, your customers, for your stakeholders. So I think the question from me is not okay. The Does the accountability have to change from an AI point of view? I think the question is if you're trying to improve loan processing, who is the executive who owns laws for loan processing? Who is the executive who's accountable to the leadership team on whether it's working right or wrong, right? Or whether it's going well, whether it's improving. Now, you could have central teams that help with coordination, with making sure that there are uniform standards, with making sure that there is a stack that they can take advantage of. But ultimately, the accountability has to stay with the business and functional owners.
What about the third parties though? Doesn't that isn't the landscape a little bit more complex now that you have the companies that's creating, deploying the models, you have those that's integrating everything together, you have those that gives the approval, you have the business owners and what have you. It just seems like there's more players involved in the life cycle of things. Or am I just making it way too complicated? Which I
Oh,
probably
not at all. We are talking today on January 15th. January 14th, there was a large outage by, I
Yes.
believe, Verizon, right?
Yes.
And we just saw what happened because of that, right?
Hmm.
And unfortunately, it's not just about Verizon. I think it's across the board. We have third parties that run a significant proportion of our infrastructure. Now, I also happened to be yesterday at a meeting of the Risk Management Association here in New York,
Oh,
the New York chapter, and we were talking about AI, and there was a discussion about AI and AI risks, and this was with senior regulators from across the OCC, the SEC, and other agencies, and there is definitely a very clear recognition that third-party risk is becoming more and more important.
hmm.
So let's say you as a firm decide, I do not want to do anything with GenAI. That third party provider that you are dependent on, they may be using GenAI. That GenAI could expose you to risks that you haven't thought through. So I think third party risk is going to become very, very important. Uh, and, uh, and so I know it is a focus, right? I know that regulators have started focusing on it. I know institutions have started focusing on it. And so the good news is that in financial services, we do have frameworks in place. I think SR 1311, which talks about third party risk, has been there since 2013. Right? So we have the frameworks in place. It's a question of applying the framework and right sizing the framework for what it is that we are doing.
Very well said. I remember, I think I was in London on a risk conference. Actually, we're on the panel. Right before the panel, that was when we had a huge Cloudflare outage. Talk about third party risk, right? Like right there. And then right before we got on the panel, we heard news that, this particular fintech, there's impact to operations. This particular bank had impact to operations just because of the significance of the role that Cloudflare plays, not just in the immediate relationship with the financial entity, but also the third parties that is relying on them. And precisely to your point, it becomes like so many layers of risk that we need to think through. I remember someone at the panel, they mentioned that, like, do we actually know how to diversify, or are we just having an illusion of diversification? Because at the end of the day, look at how many players there are. There are not that many, right? We might think we're diversifying, but are we?
Yeah, diversification and resiliency comes with costs. And so what does happen is, again, the focus, depend. I mean, today we are in a uncertain environment. Everything is getting a lot of scrutiny. So you may not be the most popular person around the table if you go and say, hey, I need to build resiliency. I need to build redundancy, right? Now, but as these events are showing us, it can be very expensive, right? The risks that you may be exposed to are fairly expensive, and I would argue that it's not necessarily that because you have, let's say, three or four cloud providers, that you cannot build a resilient infrastructure, right? But you need to look at how it is that you're designing, because you can build as resilient infrastructure if you're only on Microsoft Azure or if you're on Google Cloud or AWS, as you may be able to by having a multi-cloud strategy, right? The It's a question of, is this a priority for you? Are you designing, right? Do you have failed fallbacks? What do you have in case there is an outage in a particular region, right? Are you cross region? So I think these can be done. It's a question of, do we have the incentive
And how
because
much are we
of
willing to
consumers and
pay?
other stakeholders?
Oh my God, this is bringing back the old days. I remember back in my early telco days, one of the roles I did was resiliency in the network, and so we had all of these failover plans. We had to make sure we have 5.9 uptimes on certain operations, and then even more because otherwise we get penalties. And whew, that was not fun days. I can't even imagine how it is right now. So let's go back. I'm going to bring us back because I have a bad habit of bringing conversations sideways. So let's go back to, you recently wrote something for FinTech Futures. And in there, I just loved it, by the way. I'll put the article in the show notes. But in there, you wrote something that caught my eye, and I could not unremember it. Is that even a word? You said in there, you say the real question isn't whether you can afford to act, is whether you can afford the downside of waiting. And the answer is increasingly no. So tell us a little bit more about that piece that you wrote. And more importantly, if you're sitting across from one of the FIs right now, what would you advise them to do? What should be their best bet?
Yeah, so, as I talk in that article, I think there's a way for us to think about this asymmetry, right? We have a choice today: act now or wait, right? So, if you think through what happens if you act now and AI becomes a differentiator, then you win. Now, if you act and AI doesn't matter as much, maybe in the near future, in the next 3 years, 4 years, as predicted, you have still built organizational muscle. You have learned how your teams work with these tools, where the friction is, what your data can support. That's not wasted. Now, let's flip it. So you will wait, and AI doesn't matter. Then it's fine, right? You save some money. But if you wait and AI does separate winners from losers, you are totally caught flat footed, right? The talent gap will widen, competitors will be learning while you are planning, and that catch up is going to be extremely expensive. It always is. So if we look at this 4x4, and I'm trying to, sorry, 2x2, and I'm trying to describe something that I put up, a diagram in that article that you referenced, Theo. If you look at that and you are waiting and AI doesn't matter, the money you save is marginal at best, because we talked a little earlier about how the cost of experimentation is low. That to me makes this an absolute no brainer, right? So, my advice is start, but you do not need to have a 3 year roadmap. You do not need to, invest in a massive platform build. Start with what's available today, learn where it breaks, and then, as we talked about earlier, earn the right to build only after you know what's genuinely unique about your situation.
I love that advice. And I think it's prudent because we all get pulled in so many different directions with so many different opinions going back to how we started, right? Everyone has an opinion on exactly what it's supposed to do with AI. And I think what you offered is way more pragmatic than most of what I've heard. So I appreciate you. And I'll put the article in the show notes as well. And until next time, when we do meet, I would love to hear more about what you guys are doing. Before we close, what's your plan for this year?
Act with intention. Like I advise everyone else, my plan for 2026 is to act with purpose and intention.
Act with purpose and intention. I think that's perfect. It's perfect in a lot of ways and more than I can say. So thank you so much, Sandeep, for joining us on the show. And for the act with intention and purpose. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision. We'll talk to you next week.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.